Welcome. Dan Johnson is going to be our presenter today. He's a master gardener in Yankton here. Before we get started, I do want to announce that the master gardener classes will be held in Yankton next summer. So, and you can become a master gardener and do the volunteer work, or you can pay an extra, how much is it?
$250.
An extra $250, and then you don't have to do the volunteer work, but you could get all the information.
It costs $250 for the book and classes.
Yeah, you get a big, thick book full of information. And the way they've been doing it is the majority of the classes are held online, but there are 2 in-person classes. So those in-person classes, those days would be here in Yankton, because we'd be a host group. So if you have any questions about that, go to South SDSU Extension, and then click on the Master Gardener link, and it'll give you the information for how to register and all that stuff. Is there anything else that I need to announce? Other than, we want your suggestions for topics for next year, because after you do this for a number of years, you kind of run out of ideas as to what people might be interested in learning about. So please do that before you go. Is there anybody who wants any seeds? You do? Okay.
Maybe a few.
Yeah, okay. Well, we've got the forms here,
Okay.
and we'll fill your orders if you do.
Okay.
Okay, take it away, Dan.
All right. Well, thank you for coming this afternoon. It's kind of a wet, dreary afternoon. What better place to be than at the library? My name is Dan Johnson. I'm a master gardener here with the Missouri Valley Master Gardener Club organization. And I have been chosen to teach you how to prepare your gardens and your yards for winter time. And the reason that I think that this matters is because in the past, there's been a time-honored tradition or a method, if you will, at the end of the growing season to get into the garden, get out in the yard, and get rid of all the dead stuff that's out there. That dead stuff might have some pathogens, some pests, some bugs you don't want to have there. Maybe they'll be there and infest your garden next year. So maybe it's better just to get in there, get it all cleaned out so that it's ready to go in the spring. And you might end up with this situation, which as you're sitting out there looking out your window in the middle of February and you're already depressed, thinking you should be in Florida with John and Lee. No, I'm proposing there's a better way to do it. That maybe it'd be better to look out your window and see something like this that's got a diverse number of plants, different colors, different textures, and doing it in such a way that it's going to be better for the environment. As people interested in landscaping and gardening and maybe the planet Earth, we're striving to do certain things with our yards and our gardens, such as depicted in this slide, where we're trying to have a diversity of trees and shrubs and plants. We're trying to maybe have some features out there that would be good for the birds, like a bird bath. We're doing things to try to get away from buying plants and things that are made to grow in other parts of the world. Maybe try to have more native species. We're trying to establish little oases of habitat so that the birds, the animals, the invertebrates can move around and be in continuity with more natural areas, just to improve the complexity and the diversity of life. We do things such as try to plant flowers and things that are going to be blooming through the growing season. We have flowers in the spring, in the midsummer, even on into the winter. We're trying to do this to provide good habitat and food for the creatures that coexist with us. We know that planting natives has real advantages. The native plants that evolved to be in our part of the world have deep root structures that allow them to be more drought resistant. It allows them to increase the porosity of the soil so there's better water percolation down into the deeper layers. And it makes it so that we don't have to fertilize as much because they're adapted for these areas. And when it all comes together, you get to stand in your yards, your gardens, and you see that you really have attracted something like a monarch butterfly to this rough blazing star flower like I saw at my house this, actually just probably a month ago. So they have all these invertebrates that we've attracted to our yards and our gardens, and they are amazing animals when you really sit down and study them. They have a fairly complex life cycle as depicted in this slide, where the adults are seeking habitat to lay eggs. The eggs go through larval stages. They turn in, depending on what kind of metamorphosis they have, they may pupate and then eventually turn into adults again. But these cycles last, for the most part, last the entire year, not just the growing season. And the way that these invertebrates can survive are freezing cold temperatures and turn into adults is through a process that is absolutely incredible. It's called diapause. And it's a hibernation-like state that insects and invertebrates go through. It allows these animals to overwinter either as eggs, larvae, pupa, or adults. So it can be done in any phase of, or any stage of growth. And when the insects start to go into diapause, it's triggered by the shortening days and also by the decreasing temperatures. The physiologic things that happen with the invertebrates are also just incredible. They clearly need to slow down because there's not going to be any food in the winter, the stuff they normally eat. So their metabolism really drops down, and they use some of the stored lipids and glycogen that they have within their bodies. The insect normally has water in its body, but as it enters diapause, just like if you've ever had a can of pop left in the car or outside, and you see how the can expands and then the can ruptures, that's exactly what would happen to most of the cells of the animal or the invertebrate if it didn't do some things to mitigate that. And for these insects, what they do is they start to synthesize antifreeze solutions like glycerol, some sugars like sorbitol. It makes it so that their freezing point of the liquids in their body goes down quite a bit. And they do things like they usually eliminate all the bug poop out of their bodies because that can be a nidus for the ice formation. They basically get rid of water out of their body so that when they do go into this frozen state, their cell membranes aren't just torn up by the expansion of the water molecules. And then the third thing that happens is they stop their growth. They enter, due to hormonal suppressions and things, they just are frozen in whatever phase of life they're in. So they're not going to go from egg to larva or anything. It's like hibernation, except hibernation technically only happens in mammals. It's a hibernation-like state. And because of this life cycle, then we have this amazing diversity, this complex web of life that we especially notice in this, coming forth in the spring. It's abundantly obvious in the summer, starts to slow down in the autumn, and then we get to winter, and we've got all these invertebrates that we've taken care of, and we've made habitat for them, and then we do this to them. It's like we do all these things for the bugs, and then by the way we've traditionally managed our gardens, it's like we pulled the rug out from under them. We've done things to really help the adults, but we haven't done as much as we can do to help the entire life cycle of the invertebrates. So the main theme of my talk today is that there's a better way to do it to enhance the diversity and the number of invertebrates that want to live to the next spring and propagate themselves. So there's been a lot of research done at looking at the differences between leaving a lot of leaf litter on the ground versus not having leaf litter on the ground. And the way they usually study this is by doing trapping grids using emergence traps. And there's various kinds. This is one that was just generated by artificial intelligence. But it gives the idea across that you lay these things out, and then any insects that emerge from that will be trapped in the net and then can be collected and counted. And I was listening to a podcast from the Xerces Society from a PhD in Maryland that did trapping grids studying exactly this thing. And his results showed that within a square meter, what they were trapping is on average about 18,000 insects over a square meter. And this included 20 moth butterfly species, 300 parasitic wasps, 100 spiders, 300 beetles, and thousands of flies. Not just house flies, but the order Diptera, which is all flies. And then when they studied areas that did not have the leaf litter, it was almost cut in half the number of insects. A lot of these things live in the soil also, but having that leaf litter really doubled on average the amount of organisms that were present in that square meter. Within the leaf litter, there's many species that depend on that particular habitat. They required the leaf litter to be on top of the soil to protect them and insulate them in the winter. These include things like some of the moths, of course the bumblebees, butterflies. Many of the amphibians are dependent on having that kind of moist layer on top of the soil. And then ringneck snakes, we have a lot of those where I live, and they're just these beautiful little snakes, but they really require that kind of habitat as well. And taken all together then, it's a type of habitat that is richly complex, very interconnected between everything from the microbes, the fungi, the viruses in the soil, all the way up to the birds that are visiting, the tortoise that may be there, just the amphibians. It's an incredibly complex web of life. The thing that's best for the environment is to simply leave the leaves alone, and that's kind of the subtitle of my talk. That is the way nature evolved here. There was nobody raking leaves when our native trees dropped their leaves. That's the way it was before people were here. Now, obviously, that isn't going to work in all circumstances. So it's not always practical. There are instances when if you have too many leaves on your lawn, it can kill your lawn. It can kill your turf. That's especially true with oak leaves. Oak leaves don't decompose as fast. They may become matted, and yet the oak leaf litter is some of the best, most productive litter that we have in our this part of the world here. So John Ball, our tree expert that we get lectures from as master gardeners, is always promoting people planting oaks, but it's hard on lawns. So there are other things you can do with the leaves. Next best things include composting the leaves, collecting them, putting them into compost piles so that they gradually decompose and then can be used for soil amendments later on. You can mow the leaves as they fall in your yard and fragment the leaves, kind of tear them up so they decompose faster, and that will add nutrients back to your turf or your yards. But realize when you do that, when you put the leaf litter into the compost pile, you're going to smother or you're going to kill a lot of the invertebrates that are in there by composting the leaves. Or if you go through there with the weed whacker or the mower to tear the leaves up, you're going to wreak havoc on all the little critters that are in there as well. So you do damage to the invertebrates, but there's positive value to taking the leaves and adding the nutrients back to the soil, either as compost or as just mulch that goes into the lawn. So there's a balance that probably needs to happen within a yard. And the idea that every leaf needs to be raked up is something that we're trying to dispel. If there's yards that if all the neighbors have their leaves all raked up, say the front yards, and you don't want to stand out, maybe you really feel like, okay, I gotta rake my leaves. But maybe you can designate one section alongside of your house or somewhere in the backyard underneath the trees that you leave alone. You can see that if 1 square meter produces thousands and thousands of invertebrates that are beneficial to the environment, if you have a 10 by 15 section next to your garage that you just leave wild, that's a lot of habitat. So, do the best you can with what you have to work with and what your neighborhood allows you to do. But the more leaves you can leave down, the better it is. So let's talk a little bit about some other situations where you can enhance habitat. A lot of the perennials that we have and some of the annuals have stalks that are left after the leaves drop and the flowers go away. And within those stalks, a lot of them have a pithy material or they're hollow in the center. And these are utilized by especially native and wild pollinators to lay eggs down inside the stalk. And so what happens is that up here at the top in A, the bee has laid an egg. Well, that's the opening of the stalk. Originally, the bee climbed all the way down to the end of the stalk and laid an egg there in the chamber on the right. And you'll see that the little larva that is on the right side is bigger than the one on the left because they lay them in sequence, sometimes with days in between. So that one on the right is more mature. And on the left is a more recently developing pupa. And it's got that orange ball, which is a pollen ball. So the bee has collected pollen. It's going to be part of the food source for its offspring. And then in between it builds a wall, a chamber. So each individual has its own little bedroom. And the black stuff is what they call, that's the bug poop, called frass, F-R-A-S-S. And those things mature inside the stalk, but the process of maturation takes a whole year for that to happen. It's not going to happen in one season. So the idea in managing these stocks of plants that you have is as follows. And I just put these in. A lot of people help promote this type of habitat by making bee hotels. You can drill holes in logs. You can put like little bamboo things, hollow types of material in bee hotels, or you can have the Ritz-Carlton of bee hotels. Is this person, but it really helps promote native pollinators.
What does that say, Dan?
Who speaks? I think that's French.
Looks like it is.
Mary, do you know? It probably says bee hotel. Yes, it says bee hotel. Nobody can. So the best way to do this is if you have, say, a bunch of nice cone flowers, the flowers drop their petals, you have the seed heads. Over winter, it's best just to leave them alone. Don't do anything with them. Because those seed heads can be food source for birds, for small mammals. It adds some interest. looking out your window, wishing you were in Florida. At least you can see your attractive seed heads out there. So nothing in the winter. Then the following spring, what you do is you cut the stalks between varying heights, like between 8 and 24 inches. And that creates the ways in which the bees can get down inside. And of course, in the wind, some of the stalks are breaking, so they have access points too, but you cut the stalks off. And then with the material that you cut, it's best if you don't put that in the compost or throw it away. If you can make a brush pile or something in the back of your yard, it's better to put things like that into the brush pile. And it sort of will compost itself with time. But there's probably going to be some insects inside those stalks already. And if they get tossed in the garbage or in the compost, they're going to die, most likely. And so putting them in a brush pile is good. And then the bees come, they lay the eggs in the stalk, and the process starts like I showed in the first slide there. Then as you go into the summer, the stalks become hidden because the plant as a perennial is going to create foliage, new flowers. Those stalks will be hidden. And then you'll enter fall, and the seed heads are there again, and you just leave everything along through the winter. And then come spring, then you go ahead and do the same thing you did last spring. You cut the stalks at varying heights and put because a lot of the bees then will have already emerged. They can eat their way through the stalks also, but they emerge and it starts the process over. So it's a 1-year process of creating excellent habitat for wild pollinators. And this picture here just shows an emerging little pollinating wasp coming out of the stalk. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things you can do to enhance your soil as you get to the end of the growing season, approaching winter. And one of the things that's really being promoted a lot now, not only amongst gardeners, but also amongst just commercial agriculture, is utilization of cover crops towards the end of the growing season and into the fall. And these are usually referring to planting annual grasses such as ryegrass or oats, sometimes legumes like clovers, and hoary vetch is another one that's often used. And what this does is that these plants start to grow, and even though winter is coming and they're going to die, they get some foliage, they send down roots, and those roots put organic material into the soil. They help make the soil have greater porosity. There's better water absorption and retention because of that. And then when the foliage that's above ground does die, when winter comes, that organic material is just added to the soil and makes the soil richer. And this really can be helpful, if you plant like the legumes, then it puts nitrogen into your soil, but it really enhances the growing capacity of your soils and the health of your soil to use a cover crop. This is a great time to think about planting trees and shrubs. Usually it doesn't work so well to try to do bare root trees in the autumn for a variety of reasons, but buying trees from the nursery right now and putting them in the ground is a good time to do it. You can plant trees in the autumn until the ground freezes, but say if you planted it and the next day you got 20 below and the ground froze right away, that would not be good. It's usually good to have some weeks go by so the roots have a chance to adapt and begin to grow. Of course, you need to be careful about what you select as far as trees, and this is where you want to use SDSU extension. There's vast amount of material on the internet, but SDSU does a great job making recommendations as far as shrubs and trees that are well adapted for our area. Like I say, there's a lot of promotion planting oaks. Let's see. You want to pay attention to disease resistance and do your research before you go to all the effort of planting a tree. You want to have that tree have the best chance of survival. So use our extension service and the online information that's available. And this is another good time to think about collecting native seeds. And we have the resident expert on the milk jug technique, back row, Coral, but she's a master of this. But I thought I would mention, I just a few days ago collected these. This is Asclepias tuberosa, the butterfly weed that I have in my garden. And so I've collected these seeds, and what I'm gonna do is I've collected some of my kind of clear milk jugs, and I'm gonna take this jug and I'm gonna cut it right where the dotted line is, but I'm gonna leave a hinge back here so that I can just take this and flip it open, and I'm gonna add some potting mixture to this. I'm gonna take these seeds and I'm gonna plant them in that mixture, with just a little bit of soil over the top of it. I'm gonna make that potting soil moist but not too wet. Before I do all that, I'm gonna have drain holes in the bottom of it so it doesn't get saturated. But then this technique is gonna allow these seeds to go through a process that's called stratification. And stratification is an evolutionary thing that has allowed better success of these plants to survive. Because you can imagine if these seeds dropped out of the seed head into the ground, and then we had like a really warm autumn and nice rains and everything, if this seed just started growing again, it would never lead to a new plant because winter is coming. It's going to kill that brand new seed. So a lot of our native plants here in this part of the world have evolved stratification techniques that make it so that these seeds cannot germinate until they go through a period where they have some moisture and cold temperatures. And every plant has a little bit different requirement, but often it's a number of months or of these cold temperatures before this seed ever can germinate. So it's a way to make it so it doesn't germinate till the springtime. But if I just plant these in the soil now, they will have some chance of germinating and surviving, but they have a much better chance if I put them in a space where their birds aren't going to eat them or the little mammals aren't going to eat them, and they're in perfect conditions, the right amount of cold, the right amount of moisture, and then these will start, come springtime, they'll start to germinate, and then I can take these little plants and we can transplant them into smaller containers. And so I can grow a whole bunch in this, and then I can just transplant them into small containers. And that's what we do as master gardeners for our native plant sale. And Coral's garage and yard is full of these things. So, but it's a great technique and it's kind of fun. So and this is what happens when you ask Chat GPT to make a milk carton greenhouse thing. It came up with something that doesn't exist. So it's nice. Oh, you always want to label things, and you want to put these in places that are kind of sheltered. You don't want to have a lot of heavy direct sunlight, a little bit of shade. But any other tips, Coral, to optimize this technique?
I put mine in full sun behind a fence in my garden, so they are protected.
Do you have-
They probably don't get sun until noon, and then it disappears by 4 o'clock. So, and then, once they germinate in the spring, usually starting after April 1, I start to see germination. You do need to keep them watered.
Yeah.
But when it's frozen solid, you don't have to worry about watering them. But I think the most failure people have is that they don't water them once they germinate.
Yeah.
So once they thaw out, you gotta keep them watered.
So if I planted these now, and well, say after the first frost, if I put them out, that's not too early. I don't have to wait till December or January?
It's suggested that you wait for the winter solstice because you don't want things to germinate, but if you're growing a native, you can plant those now because that's what Mother Nature's doing, and
Yeah.
they're not going to germinate until they get that stratification
Okay.
period. So if you have a native seed that doesn't actually need a stratification period, I wouldn't recommend doing those now. I would wait until we have solid freezing weather.
Okay, good, thank you. I want to make a pitch for using less chemicals. We're taught as master gardeners to really follow the principles of integrated pest management, which basically means that all insects aren't bad, that if you have a, say, vegetable crop or something and you see insects on it, first of all, identify the insects, see if it's really going to be a problem, and then monitor how big a problem is it. I mean, if you just get a few of something, it may not impact your your crop at all. And look to see if there's planting certain seeds that are more disease resistant is helpful. You can have less trouble with pests and less need for chemicals. If you do good crop rotation, so you're not putting the same thing in the same spot all the time, that's going to be helpful. There's non-chemical things like using some of the, like diatomaceous syrup works really well on snails and slugs, and neem oil, and there's Bacillus thuringiensis, there's that kills a lot of insects. So sometimes you do end up using insecticides, but realize usually that's going to kill all the insects, and just keep it in your mind. You don't have to use chemicals all the time. You never want to fertilize on frozen ground or on the snow. Same thing, because it'll tend to just wash off and be in our water supply then and end up in the river. And if you do are fertilizing and stuff at various times, make sure it gets swept off sidewalks and driveways and stuff, because that also is likely just to end up in the water instead of doing any good. There are a lot of really great battery and battery powered tools, and of course electric tools, but when people use small gas engines, it's very noisy, it can harm your hearing, it does make a lot of pollution, and so just be cognizant that there's eco-friendly tools, and manual tools often work real well for small jobs. If you have really big projects, you almost always are going to have some sort of gas power because you can't have that many batteries, but keep it in mind, there's a lot of eco-friendly tools now. I wanted to talk a little bit about taking care of trees because in our cold weather, when we have lots of snow on the ground, the rabbits are looking for food, and they can go in and girdle a tree, eat all the bark around the outside of it, and then it'll die. Same thing with deer. They live out in the country. When the bucks are rubbing on the trees with their antlers, they can girdle it. So you may need to protect your young trees. If we get lots of snow, even if you put protection on some of your trees and shrubs, if the snow gets high enough, then the rabbits can still just go over the top. So you got to be able to adjust your protection if the snow gets too deep. I did want to mention, as far as mulch can be really good for your trees, as long as you don't make mulch volcanoes. You want to have an area there at the flare of the trunk where it meets the ground as an open spot. Otherwise, there can be things that can infest the trees. So mulch is good, keeps the soil moist, but don't pile it up on the trunk. Some of the shrubs that we may have might need to have some extra protection if they're maybe more for climate zones that are a little warmer than what we have here. So sometimes you need to burlap wrap some of your more sensitive shrubs. Mulching is great to help protect the ground, insulate the roots, but you don't want to cover everything up. Usually you want to have the crown of the plant still exposed. We're in USDA hardiness, plant hardiness zone 5A right now, and we're always kind of pushing the limits. And so if we push the limits too much, you may need to protect those plants. It's also good to put mulch and leave the leaves to insulate the ground, because we do have a problem with frost heaving in some of our garden beds. And what happens with frost heave is because ice expands or water expands when it turns to ice, and then it may melt. And when we get warm days in January, we get a lot of expansion, contraction, and that can shear the roots on plants, especially small roots, and can damage the plant. So having an insulating layer of mulch can help negate the effects of frost heave. The seed heads that we leave in the gardens are good food for birds and small mammals. And also having that kind of structure as escape habitat for, say, small birds. If a Cooper's hawk is coming through and swooping down, so it's good to have that kind of habitat. And it's really one thing that can bring a lot of birds into your yard. If you haven't ever had a heated water source, like a heated bird water, you'll be amazed how many birds will come to that. And this is just outside my own window last winter, and this is a typical scene. You know, we go many days with no precipitation. The birds prefer not to have to eat snow for their water, because you know they're warm-blooded animals. They have to devote a lot of energy to negate that freezing the snow to make water. So if you have a heated water source, it's just like a magnet. This shows, of course, shows a bunch of cedar waxwings and an eastern bluebird taking advantage of that open water. When we're trying to avoid falling down in the winter and we're laying things down like salt, we have to be aware that too much salt can be detrimental to the plants. It can make it so that it harms the soil chemistry, so certain nutrients aren't as available to the plants. And it's good if you know there's snow and ice that's got a lot of salt in it, it's best if you don't dump it onto your plants. This is probably a bigger issue with municipalities and keeping their boulevard trees alive when they're using lots of ice. But realize there may be safer alternatives. You can use cat litter, for instance. There's different types of salts instead of sodium chloride that you can use. They even use beet juice. The sugars in that lower the freezing temperature of water and makes it so that it's not as icy. You can keep composting all through the winter. Not much is going to happen except it'll turn into a frozen block of vegetable matter and coffee grounds. But as spring comes, that'll decompose. So go ahead and keep your kitchen scraps and just put them on your compost pile. And when you, but realize for garden waste and stuff that may have invertebrates in it, if you put it in the compost pile, they're probably not going to survive because they get smothered. They can't get out to escape. And then compost in the summer does heat up a lot. That's the most effective composting is when you get the temperatures up pretty high. So that'll also kill the organisms. But that compost is such valuable amendment to the nutrition and the structure of your soils. It's worth doing. A little bit about pruning. Usually we prune when trees and shrubs are dormant. Every different trees and different shrubs are maybe pruned in the best way. How do I want to say this? Trees have different optimal times to prune, and it's always good to do a little research online to see when you should be pruning. But there's one instance when you have diseased plants, like this is a picture of a fruit tree that's got fire blight, you really want to get that out of there. So it'd be better just to remove that, resect that. And then this is the stuff you do not want to compost. You want to get rid of these pathogens. So this should go in the garbage to be hauled to the landfill or burned if that's excessive. If that's something that can be done in your neighborhood. Realize that you don't want to cross-contaminate your plants. So if you do have some sort of a disease or a fungus and you're doing the pruning, you got to clean your tools in between. Otherwise, you can transmit the pathogen to a healthy plant. And that also can happen, especially like powdery mildew or things like that. It'll be on your boots, it'll be on your gloves. So you also want to not contaminate with the clothing that you've got. And then finally, the autumn can be a really good time to do one more session of weeding. If you can get rid of some of these weeds that are there, it'll lead to less weeding next season. It is okay to have some bare ground in your landscaping because bare ground is necessary for some of the ground dwelling bees. And this includes bumblebees. Bumblebees live in the ground and they will not dig through a bunch of leaf litter to make their burrows. They're looking for bare spots and it'll often be adjacent to rock walls or concrete. So it's okay to have some bare areas. Having diversity of your habitat in your landscaping, it leads to diversity of the invertebrates and the animals. So bare ground, a little bare ground is fine. So just kind of summarizing things, I'm making a pitch to avoid over clearing of your yards and gardens. It's good to leave a layer of natural litter where possible. And if you're constrained by the standards of your neighborhood, try to at least designate some part of your yard that you can more or less let be wild. There's a lot of advantages to this. There's a lot happening underneath the leaves, and leaving it there is really a benefit to the invertebrates and other animals. It's providing a food source for the birds in the winter. You often see birds scraping through leaves and stuff, eating those insects and things. So it's just leaves for a much more healthy, diverse habitat. I mentioned the Xerces Society. They have a couple cute little signs that they sell, and this one has a lot of good information. Just pointing out that leaves are not litter. And then this is a cute one. It just says, neighbors may think you're crazy or just plain lazy, but the little guys know you're a real hero when you leave the leaves. And if you do take a more environmental approach to your yard, and you want to let the neighbors know you're not just being slack by not, raking up every leaf, there are a lot of signs and things you can buy online to not only let your neighbors know what you're doing, but also to educate your neighbors. Because although it's not very prevalent in Yankton yet, when you go to places like Minneapolis, you see many people starting to really embrace this way of doing their gardening and their winter preparation, and it's just a matter of changing attitudes. We have sort of a Scandinavian mindset or something. Everything has to look sterile and clean and everything, and it's really not the best thing for the environment in general to do that. These are some of my references. When we do these talks, we always try to make sure we're using references that are from universities, and so these were some of mine. And that's it. Any questions?
One thing John Ball says, like with apple trees, you need to clean up the apples and everything from underneath your trees, because there's insects that go out of the apples and into the soil, and then you create more insect problems for your fruit trees the next year.
Yeah. Yeah, there's special circumstances like that where it's not good to leave a bunch of stuff underneath, but. Yeah, well, thank you very much.